So very much welcome to this webinar. Like I said, I think it's a really good idea to get everybody together. We've got some very good speakers this morning. So far, so good as far as Devon and the Southwest is concerned. I would love it to be in a position to tell you that COVID was under control, but of course it's not. And so various parts of the country, as you know, are being locked down. The North are not very happy.
You're mute.
It keeps changing, and parts of London are now also being locked down. So like I said, it is a situation where I think we must keep going in the West Country, be as careful as possible, but keep as much business going as possible for as long as we possibly can. So that's, you know, really where I see it. So the webinar this morning is being sponsored by Better Business for All, the Federation of Small Business, the Chamber of Commerce, the Institute of Directors, Devon Tourism Alliance, and Visit Devon. So we are very thankful for them. I think I've got everybody in, have I? Yes. And Devon and Plymouth Chamber as well. So Southwest Tourism Alliance, right. So thank you very much, everybody, for sponsoring it. And I think we will now go straight on in really to the start. So the first speakers are David Ralph, who is a CEO of the Heart of the Southwest LEP, and then also Philip Adams, Senior Director, County Council. And we're going to talk about supports availability for tourism industry, grants, digital skills and apprenticeships. So I think then I will go straight over to David Rolfe to start proceedings. And like I said, this section should take us about 10 minutes, all being well. So over to you, David, please.
Okay, so morning everybody. So I'm Chief Executive of the Heart of Southwest Local Enterprise Partnership. We cover Devon and Somerset, including Torbay and Plymouth. So Neil is one of our constituency MPs. I think it's important to say that we've done a lot of work with Cornwall and Dorset particularly, and also reaching up into sort of Bristol conurbation, but particularly with Cornwall and Dorset on the tourism challenge, and also hospitality and associated supply chains. So I'm delighted that through the support of the destination management organisations and the Southwest Tourism Alliance, that actually the group across Cornwall and Heart of Southwest and Dorset are working pretty collaboratively in order to identify what is very challenging. So whilst we have quite low incidence of the pandemic across our region, the economic impact is pretty stark, not least to this sector where it was hit early, hit hard, and I'm sure we'll go into some of the details. But what I wanted to do was in two parts really, just to remind people of some of the business support that is available. And then Phil, if he's here, I'm not sure he's here yet, is going to do the skills and employment support as well. If he doesn't turn up, I'll cover that off as well.
Phil's here, David.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so the first point is important, is that the Growth Hub, which operates across the whole of Somerset and Devon, there's equivalent in Cornwall and Dorset as well, is really a good opportunity for any business support that you need. It is there to support you, assist you. What's important about it, it is a recognised delivery vehicle of government. So every day we get, for example, an update on what the COVID details are, how can we support, etc., etc. So it's the official line. Now, I don't want to say don't go to the Chamber or don't go to the FSB or don't go to the others, because they are also really, really useful. But part of my job as LEP Chief Exec is to oversee the Growth Hub, and it is there and available for you to use. It's impartial. It can give you advice. It's largely a signposting service, so it will largely direct people. And one of the key functions of it is one of the sponsors, Better Business for All today, where It's also very good about directing you if there's licensing, planning, regulations issues. We've done a lot of work across our patch to try and minimize the red tape. Now, you can never minimize all the red tape, and I would absolutely support businesses in recognizing there is too much red tape in running a business, but where we can help, we will do that. So I would absolutely commend to you doing the Growth Hub. We moved our Growth Hub service in-house at the beginning of the year, and to be honest, thank God we did, because we've had to be massively agile in supporting COVID business. We've had about 4 or 5 times the level of support. We've been running grant programs, etc. So we run it as an in-house service now, which is really improved. Can we go on to the next slide, please? We do recognise very clearly that many of you out there are busy running your own business. So we will be there to support you in however much support you want. So if you are looking to get a grant or something, we can handhold you through that process. If you are looking just for a bit of advice on who your planning authority is, or how do you pay your tax, or is there any support available, then we can quickly do that and signpost you towards that. So it is really clear to recognise that lots of businesses are busy, particularly at the moment, but that service is available to you and you can find it on the web. And I'll give you the details at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the measures that we've done over the last few weeks is we got a little bit of money for what's called a Kickstart grant program. Now there is a different Kickstart jobs program, which we'll come on to. We got about £750,000 from the government to support tourism businesses and other businesses across the patch. Neil will know that we thought this was a pretty small amount, and we are asking for more money because unfortunately all that grant now is gone. So if there are 7,500 businesses, tourism businesses across the heart of the Southwest. That amount of money, £750,000, meant that we were able to give out about 350 grants. So I'm not saying all of those businesses need a grant, but you can see, whilst it was useful to those 350 odd who got some money, there are thousands of businesses out there who applied and weren't able to secure money. So we have asked our MPs to support us in trying to get some more money to support further grants to the sector in order to support us, and particularly if we start to see things go down. There are some rules. You can only spend it on certain things. The average grant we gave out was about £2,500. As I say, that is now closed, but hopefully with Neil's support, we can push to try and get some more money. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so largely these are national schemes identified by the Chancellor. So you would have seen some significant changes to this in the last couple of weeks with the Chancellor's winter plan. But it is quite staggering the amount of take up of some of these national schemes. So in terms of loan funding, over £4 billion has been given out through CBILS and bounce back loan schemes across the Southwest. Something like 140,000 businesses have successfully secured. It's about 102,000 for bounce back, and the balances will be CBILS, and there's a few in CL bills as well, which is the largest scheme. But huge amounts of funding that has gone out through those mechanisms as loans. We were concerned about the payback at the end of March, that aligning with VAT, etc., VAT window. In the winter plan, some of that changed a little bit. I won't go into details of that, but we can clarify that. So we think that has been heard by the Chancellor about what we call the cliff edges, where suddenly all these payback schemes start to bite. And certainly if we're going into, across the country, a greater degree of curfews and possible closures, then how we soft land those loans coming back is a real challenge. And then finally, we've also expressed to the Chancellor our concern that generally the amount of bad debt that might be about. So one of the odd situations about these loan schemes is the banks are protected, but actually businesses aren't. And we've asked the Chancellor to recognise that whilst the Chancellor guarantees the bank loans, it doesn't guarantee the business. And that's quite a tough thing for a Chancellor to do. But these are important mechanisms that have been taken up extensively across our patch. We have a higher degree of take up of these loans than proportionately a number of our businesses. We think that makes us particularly vulnerable. but we have something like 36-37% of our business, is a bit different across the patch, who've taken out these loans across our area. Okay, coming on to the next slide. Okay, something we've done particularly in the heart of the Southwest is focus on digital. So we had a range of digital initiatives. So what we found throughout the COVID crisis is that those businesses who are either operating an e-commerce site or who operate systems that are digitally based have been more resilient. So and some of these are still available. We have launched during COVID a bounce back digital program, which essentially is a skills program to give support to businesses. They're on our website. Some of them are, the last wave of those is going on now. We've also launched a gigabit broadband voucher schemes, so you can secure some funding to help you with gigabit connections. There's £1 million available of funding there. We've hosted a whole series of webinars around things like search engine optimization, etc. And we've tried to use other people's programs like BT, like IBM. One of the skills schemes we've done is with Coursera, particularly targeting individuals, but there's some business support schemes out there as well. So they're all on our website. Go and have a look there, or on the Growth Hub website, and we'll just supply some details at the end for those. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, Phil, are you there? Because I think you're going to do it.
Yeah, I am, David. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so over on the skills and employment side, I mean, as David said, there's a huge amount of support for business, but alongside that, there's been a large package of support around skills and employment. And some of this is about directly helping existing employees to stay in roles or to provide companies with additional support. Some of it is around supplementary. The largest package within this is around young people, and actually a lot of the support is around young people, particularly 16 to 24. Kickstart, which hopefully you'll have seen, but if you haven't, I would sort of say go and have a look at it if you're interested. It's a £2 billion programme looking to support 16 to 24-year-olds to get them into work. It's a 6-month placement that the employer gets fully paid for at national minimum wage up to 25 hours. It also comes with some wraparound support for the young person, training, skills, onboarding, IT, and that's £1,500. It can be in any sector, it can be any type of business. The only rules around it are if you're looking to take on more than 30 candidates, you talk directly to Department of Work and Pensions. If you're looking to take on less than 30 candidates, which most businesses are, you work through a local intermediary, and there's a list of intermediaries that we can help with as the LEP of looking to work with businesses around taking forward placements. I mean, in terms of risk and in terms of the approach for the employer, that young person comes and works for you. It's got no cost, but obviously you've got the supervisory piece. In terms of the young person, because I realise that we're employers, but we've also linked to young people, the young person just has to be on universal credit. They don't have to be on for any particular length of time. They don't have to have any particular status. It can include everybody from those with basic skills right the way through to graduates. The only thing you have to do is walk through the door of a job centre, and then you can apply to become a Kickstart candidate. So it's one to look at. It's a really strong scheme. It's rolling out now in terms of interest, but the first placements due to start in November, and there'll be further details, I suspect, over the next 4 or 5 weeks, as well as a big national campaign. But we can answer some questions about that as we go through it. Alongside that, if we move on to the next slide, there's a range of other support, and David's touched on some of this. There's probably 3 major schemes that I think I'd touch on at the moment. There's the job retention bonus. So alongside the furlough schemes and the extension schemes that we've seen over the last few weeks, there is also a one-off payment to businesses to keep hold of staff that were put onto furlough earlier this year. If you've not looked at that or you're not planning on claiming that, do, but I realise that most businesses are on it already. In a similar way, there's additional financial support that's been put in place around apprenticeships and traineeships. So government is looking to support businesses that have taken on a new apprentice this year. If they're between 16 and 24, as you can see, it's a £2,000 payment. If they're over the age of 25, it's £1,500 payment. The phasing of those payments is fairly rapid, and they are looking at trying to quicken that a little bit to make sure that that support comes in. Not huge amounts of money, but it's just an additional extra if you are somebody that's already taken on an apprentice. Now, over and above those support packages, there's a range of local support in there already. One of those is the Skills for the Workforce programme. That's led by Serco locally. It's a program of free training, free upskilling, and free support for staff within small and medium businesses. It can be in any sector, and they'd be happy to have a chat. We can provide their contact details. Alongside that, though, they've also got wraparound service for businesses that are looking at redundancy or looking at redeployment of staff, and they can support around that, looking at some of those packages of support and looking at linking up, working very closely with Job Centre Plus. So there's a fairly comprehensive package of support out there as well. There's more to come. The Prime Minister announced a further £2 billion of training support up to A level for every adult from March, and we'll be providing details about that. But we can talk through if you're interested at any point. If you've got a chance, I would direct you towards the Skills Launchpad. skillslaunchpad.org.uk, which is where the Heart of the South West keeps all of our information about training and skills. And I think that was all I was going to say. If we go to the next slide.
I think we're going to have to try and speed it up because we're going well over time, please.
Last slide.
Last slide. So just to conclude, this and the next slide, I've got the details. There were a couple of questions. I'm not sure, Phil, if you want to pick those up, I'll do them later. So just to conclude, there is quite a lot of support out there. It's really always good to have feedback on it. So there is increasing support to support young people around skills, particularly. So watch this space. One of the things we've been asking for is more funding for this sector. One of the obvious ways of doing that is right at the start, government announced a series of emergency grants to business, which is administered through local authorities. There is a bit of that money surplus across the Heart of South West, about 30 to 40 million. The Treasury is pulling that back in. We have worked quite hard with our MPs, as Neil will know, to try and keep that money local, and that could be spent on supporting grants going forward. So we will have another push for that, but at the moment, the Treasury is looking to pull that money back in. So that is a mechanism by which we can use. If we just go on to the final slide, I think there are some email addresses and stuff if you want more details, or go to our Growth Hub website. So thank you very much.
Right, well, thank you to David and Phil very much. It was very good presentations, and I think we'll deal with the questions when we get to the end, because otherwise we won't sort of get through everybody. I just wanted to sort of very, very quickly, you know, the grants and the loans are very important. The fact about protecting businesses as well as protecting the bank, having been a farmer all my life, I understand all about that. So let's, you know, talk to the Chancellor about that. I think on the kickstart and getting, you know, apprenticeships and getting people into work, especially the young people, are going to be a real challenge, and everything I can do to help on that I will do. So we will whip quickly on now to Alistair Handyside, who's going to talk about time to shine, how to adapt to change and survive. And of course, Alistair lives in an excellent constituency. So over to you, Alistair, please.
You're on mute.
I'm not on mute. Can you hear me now? Right, I'm not going to, for a change, be berating our politicians for more support. I'll leave that to the other 4.5 days a week and focus on ways today that you can adapt your business and try and make sure you make the most of what is possible. We are entering the winter period. October half term is the last hurrah for a lot of businesses, but we do have a situation where there is very little foreign travel available, and people do have an appetite for holidays. And perhaps the word to start thinking about isn't staycation, but nearcation. So people start thinking about having holidays nearer to perhaps home than they would do normally. We have the restrictions. We are all pretty clear on what they are, but this isn't lockdown. For many of us, it's very difficult, but it is an ability to at least partially trade, and we should take advantage of that, as it is hard to believe better than full lockdown. So you've got to adapt your business. You've got to look at the restrictions that are in place and find ways in which to make sure that you can optimize your income during this period. And that means to really start thinking about lots of different aspects of it. You've always got to do your risk assessment and think about the COVID preparations, because that's got to be a fundamental driver for your business. But once you've got that worked out, what you can do with your business, then whether you're a pub or a restaurant or a hotel or a holiday cottage, you've got to start thinking about how you can get those bookings, how you can get that income. And I'm going to talk about 4 things very briefly. They are partners, pricing, photographs, and social media. At the moment, the appetite for holidays is being depressed by words like curfew, restriction, lockdown, borders being closed. This does not make for a very a confident marketplace where holidays would be booked. But counter that with, it's very difficult to go abroad. So we do have a chance to sell through this winter period. So have a look at your photographs first. Your photographs have got to be fit for purpose and timely. The internet is an extraordinarily competitive place, and it's your shop window. So in a high street sense, if you've got not very interesting things in the shop window, they're not going to come in. And what are interesting things at the moment? And people want to be seeing pictures of cozy log fires. They want to be knowing that the place is dog friendly, or that there are nice walks nearby, or there's somewhere you go and eat nearby. You've got to get your unique selling points in a row and get those out as your lead photographs. Bedrooms and bathrooms are great, but at the moment, people need inspiration as to why they might book. So once you've got your photographs sorted, and the leaves are falling off the trees, so photographs need to be done sharpish, would be my advice. Once you've got that, you need to look at your pricing. Pricing will be very competitive during the winter, but that doesn't mean rock bottom. Pricing is where you market will determine where you price. So if you take, for example, a Rolex watch and you market that in Aldi, it does look very, very expensive. However, if the platform you're marketing on is New Bond Street, that Rolex watch starts to look like extraordinary good value. So price is not the driver. Where you market is really, really, really important. So you need to look at comparable websites where you market your product and see what other people are charging for similar products, and try and price in the upper third of that average pricing. Don't go to the bottom. People will just pass you over as too cheap. So try and keep in the upper third of that pricing of comparable properties in your area with similar USPs. So once you've got your pricing and your photographs sorted out, those partners need a review and a refresh. Every one of those platforms you're on need to have those new photographs, your new copy, your new pricing made clear so that the guests can find those products, can find those packages that you're offering, whatever kind of business you are. The trouble is, if people aren't really looking, how can you drive people to see that on your now brand spanking new shiny photographs website with great pricing? And the answer is social media. At the moment, social media will be the primary driver for you getting bookings. Whilst people may not be looking at various obvious websites to go and think about a booking, they are scrolling through their social media, and a gorgeous 4 or 5 photographs of your offer, plates of food, lovely log fire views out of your windows, all of the different things that you can offer with your different kind of businesses. Those photographs will inspire people to click through and think about booking. Offers don't have to be discount. Offers are offers, not necessarily cheap offers. So make your offers available very clearly on social media. For me, with my business, over 50% of our bookings going forwards towards Christmas are coming from social media posts to our website rather than on conventional platforms. So that's worth investigating. There are lots of online courses. There are lots of courses offered on how to do social media and top tips to get these bookings. We are going to run a webinar on this. If anybody wants to find out about top tips and social media, there will be a webinar on the 28th of October, which will be free to people to register for. If you wanted to find out about that, email me at chair@paskuk.co.uk. And I think I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alistair. That was really good. I think let's hope we can, keep the season going. I think people will be wanting to look to still come to a nice area of the country. They won't be able to travel abroad in the same way. If we don't get too bad a weather as well, it could all fit very well. And I really take your point about where you pitch your market and how, because at the end of the day, you need to be open to do business, but you also need to make a little bit of money from that business, don't you? Not just be open for just just because you need to be open. So I very much thank you for that. I don't think I've ever known you to be so short, Alistair. So well done. I congratulate you this morning. Right, okay then. So we'll go on now to Sarah Ogilvie. She is Devon County Council Public Health Team. So over to you, Sarah, please.
Thank you. I will turn my video off in a minute just because I have bandwidth problems. Hi, everyone. So I'm a consultant in public health at Devon County Council. I've also got my colleague with me, James Kershaw, who's our Environmental Health Liaison Officer. He's going to be sort of monitoring the chat while I'm speaking and will help to answer any questions you might have. So I'm just going to turn my video off now, if that's okay. Okay, so just wanted to flag that we're from Devon County Council, and there are obviously different public health teams across Devon and Cornwall and Somerset as well. And obviously I don't work for Public Health England, so there's a bit of a distinction there. So we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, just some caveats before I start. So this presentation is primarily aimed at owners, managers and operators of indoor and outdoor tourist attractions and accommodation. It's just worth mentioning that there is variation in approaches by the different local authority public health teams and environmental health teams. So there are slight nuances between the way in which we do things. So it's always best to check in with your own local team as to how they want situations to be managed. Also, just the fact that there is constantly new guidance being published, so changes to any guidance may alter the advice in my presentation. Also, as we've seen an increase in cases, PHE have, the sort of Public Health England health protection team have been extremely busy and overwhelmed with the number of calls coming through to their team. So they are at the moment sort of refining the way in which they manage possible cases of COVID, single cases and outbreaks in different settings. And I have got wind that potentially there's going to be a new sort of national helpline launch next week. I don't know who it's aimed at, who it's come from, or what the focus is going to be on, helpfully, but I have heard that that is in the pipeline, and I think that will help to manage all the queries that are coming into Public Health England at the moment. The key thing to say is really just check the national action card that is most relevant to your setting. And these action cards are being updated all the time. So if you've printed it off from a while ago, do make sure you've got the most up-to-date version. And I have put a number of guidance links at the end of the presentation if you need further information. So let's go on to the next slide. So in terms of responding to COVID cases then, so in reality, you're most likely to hear about a case from your staff member who may be reporting symptoms or may have come back positive, or a visitor or a guest. The other way that we do get information, so into the local authority public health teams, we are getting access to all of the test and trace data that's coming through the system. So we, through that, may get alerted to premises or settings where we know there are cases or a number of cases through that test and trace system. In that instance, we are, certainly for Devon County Council anyway, we are notifying our environmental health colleagues, and you may find that you get a phone call from them just checking in with you around your COVID secure measures. So I think that's it on that one. So we'll go on to the next slide. So what to do then if you have a case or a suspected case of COVID in your setting? The key message really is the person with symptoms needs to isolate, and they would isolate along with their household if relevant. The next thing is that they need to request a test immediately, either online or they can call 119 if they don't have internet access. The key message is that only people with symptoms should get tested. I've seen situation after situation where somebody's positive and then everybody else goes and requests a test. And a negative test, if you're a contact of a case, doesn't mean that you haven't got COVID. So if your test then comes back negative, you can come out of isolation. There's no more for you to do. If they come back positive, then this is where the NHS test and trace process will kick in, and they will undertake contact tracing. There is a bit, as you're probably aware from the national news, there's a lot of work going on at the moment around test and trace processes and the interface with Public Health England. And I think probably it's best to just not go into the detail about identifying workplace contacts at the moment while that's all being worked through. But you can help, you can start to gather information if you know that you've got a case in a member of your staff or in the setting. But I'll come on to that in a minute. So contacts of cases will be asked to self-isolate for 14 days. As I mentioned, even if they go and get tested during that isolation period, they still have to isolate for the full 14 days as a contact of a case, because they could be incubating the infection at the time of getting tested. The key message as well is that contacts of contacts don't need to isolate. So if you alone are a contact of a case at work, the rest of your household doesn't need to isolate. So I can, again, take any questions about that at the end. So anyone who then goes on to develop symptoms while they're isolating needs to get tested, and you would then isolate for 10 days from when your symptoms started. And the key message, I guess, is really that you can seek advice from your local authority as per any local arrangements that might be in place. I'm sorry, that's my dog who's groaning in the background. Probably bored of hearing me talking, to be honest. So let's move on to the next slide. What's the definition of a close contact? So the key thing really is a close contact is defined as someone who's in contact with a positive case in the 48 hours before their symptoms started until 10 days after. So it is really relevant when you're trying to manage an outbreak situation, because the public health team want to know who's had contact with the case in the 48 hours before they develop symptoms until 10 days after. And I won't go into details there, but there's a definition there of what a close contact means. And the key thing is to think about contacts both in and outside of work, including breaks, and in terms of travelling to and from the workplace as well. So next slide, please. So when to tell public health. So as I said earlier, Public Health England at the moment are really overwhelmed, and you may have found that you've been on hold for a long time trying to get through to them. They're really only dealing at the moment with very high risk situations and settings and outbreaks. And the role of local authorities in terms of how we support contact tracing and the response is changing in light of that. So as I mentioned, there's talk of a potential national helpline being launched next week. But the key thing really is to refer to the National Action Card, as the guidance will vary by setting. And I've just put there really what's in the guidance at the moment. So if you have a hotel or guest accommodation, Public Health England want to know if you've got more than one possible or confirmed case within 14 days of each other. And for tourist attractions, they want to know if you've got more than one confirmed case within 14 days of each other. So in terms of outbreaks, we're really thinking about time, place, and person, and whether they're linked. Do we have an outbreak going on in that setting? In this instance, you need to immediately contact your local Public Health and Health Protection team for help and advice. And I've put the telephone number there for the local team for the South West. You can also contact your local authority or environmental health team for advice, but obviously just check in with the local arrangements, because I'm used to what Devon's doing, but obviously Plymouth and Torbay and Somerset and Cornwall have different approaches. So next slide, please. So it's really important before you ring Public Health England to have the following information ready to go. And I've taken this from the National Action Card. They'll be particularly interested in knowing about onset dates, so when the person with COVID or symptoms first got symptoms, and who their contacts might be. So I'll leave you to read that one in your own time. So move on to the next slide. So in terms of the role of public health, we will work with you to assess the risks and give advice. If you're talking to Public Health England, they will actually let us know in the local authority public health teams what advice and conversation they've had with you. And we will also alert the relevant environmental health team. And as I said earlier, you might find that environmental health will get in touch with you to discuss your COVID secure measures and offer advice. The other thing just to say is if you do have a large scale outbreak on your hands, we might decide to hold what we call an outbreak control team meeting, or OCT. And this is really formed to help support you to manage the situation. So it's going to be a multi-agency meeting with a range of key stakeholders. So environmental health will be there, local authority, Public Health England colleagues, and you will also be asked to attend, or somebody to represent your setting. And they will be chaired by Public Health, and we'll go over details of the cases, the dates, what control measures need to be put in place, and any communications. And we always tend to prepare a reactive press statement. And I know there's a presentation on comms shortly after mine. The OCT might consider possible closure of the setting, but I just wanted to say this really is a last resort measure, and we try and avoid that wherever possible. So next slide, please. So what can you do? And this is the key thing, really. It doesn't matter if you've got one case, two or more. The measures, the control measures are exactly the same. So how can you prevent further spread in your setting? The first thing really is to make sure your COVID secure measures are in place and you're fully following those. I think we've seen with some settings, as time has gone on, people have got exhausted and fed up with it all, and we have seen some slipping of that. So it's really important that you maintain those COVID secure measures, and you can speak to environmental health colleagues about that. The next thing is really the enhanced cleaning. And I've been involved in a number of outbreak calls over the last couple of weeks, and it really is thinking about touch points. You know, we've seen outbreaks linked to kettle handles, door handles, where you've got bin lids that you constantly have to press the bin lid for it to lift up. So think about those areas that people are constantly touching and make sure you clean them really regularly. And you might want to consider deep cleaning of areas if you've got a number of cases as well. There's obviously quite strict guidance around dealing with contaminated waste. So you want to double bag it and leave it for 72 hours before you put it in with your normal waste. Laundry management, you need to be washing things at 60 degrees, high temperatures, and you can consider the use of alginate bags as well, which dissolve in the washing machine and help to reduce the risk of spread of infection. Hand washing and sanitizer. Everyone says to me, we've got loads of alcohol gel, but have you actually got it in the right places? So actually, people are prompted if they see a dispenser on entrances and exits, it becomes habitual. Rather than them carrying it around in their pocket, they've got to think about doing it. Also making sure you've got sanitizer and facilities, in your bathrooms, hallways, kitchen spaces, laundry and staff rooms. And certainly from the outbreaks in different settings that I've been involved in, there's been connections to the staff room spaces or spaces where staff are getting changed, etc. And also in the kitchen, the communal areas where you've got high flow of traffic, lots of touch points. And also in terms of people making tea and coffee for each other, it's handling the milk carton, handling the fridge door, handling the kettle handle. That's another way that we're seeing COVID spread. Obviously, you've got to follow the advice around face coverings, any personal protective equipment that you might need to wear, following the social distancing of 2 meters or 1 meter plus with mitigation, so your face coverings coming into play. Where possible, making sure your ventilation is really good, having doors and windows open, getting that flow of air through. Familiarising your staff with the self-isolation and testing guidance is really important. The other things I just wanted to mention is thinking about how people travel to your setting in terms of the staff, any staff accommodation, and also staff socialising outside of work. Pretty much every outbreak I've been involved in to date, the setting itself has excellent COVID measures in place. It's what's happening outside of the setting, staff mixing socially, not following the social distancing guidelines. It's the activity that's going on outside in the staff accommodation, for example, that's causing the issues, not the setting itself. Obviously, making sure you've got really clear communication with your staff and customers. And I've just put some links there. If there are language barriers, there are resources now. So there's Language Line you may be aware of, obviously, but also DCC. We've now got a web page with we're trying to translate a lot of the documents ourselves into different languages, just because we're aware that nationally they've been really slow, actually, in terms of getting that sorted. And there are some languages which aren't covered. So we've now added Tagalog, for example. So worth having a look at. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So there's a poster there that we've produced off the back of something that Cornwall did around car sharing advice, which might be useful for your staff, particularly if there are language barriers as well. Sort of an easy read version, which we can share afterwards. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to put some information here about the sort of things that environmental health colleagues will be considering when they come and talk to you, just so you can sort of preempt that really and have a think about that. So I won't go into the detail now, just in conscious of time, but you can read that in your own time. And it's just the sort of things that environmental health will be thinking about, particularly before they come and do a site visit. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to cover really what to do if someone staying in your accommodation has symptoms, because this causes a lot of anxiety for people. So the key message really is that the guests need to inform you as soon as possible. They need to isolate immediately, and we need to get a test requested for them. So they can do that online or, as I mentioned, via phone. If the guest can't reasonably return home, then you might need to seek advice from a healthcare professional or the local authority. You'll need to think about their meal and laundry provision. Do they have any dietary requirements, etc. You want to think about whether symptomatic guests should be responsible for cleaning their own rooms and stripping their own beds just to reduce any additional risk. The other thing just to say is obviously the guests will be expected to pay the costs of an extended stay in all but exceptional circumstances in accordance with the national guidance. So where self-isolation isn't possible, so you may have shared facilities such as a shared kitchen or sort of living space, then guests really should make arrangements to travel home as safely as possible whilst minimising risks to others. The key thing really to say is that it's wise to inform your guests about your policy for symptomatic guests during the booking in and check-in process, so they're really aware of the circumstances and what's going to happen if they do develop symptoms when they're there, particularly around making sure that they, immediately inform you and isolate to reduce any further risk. And then once the guest and if appropriate, their family has finished isolation and is no longer symptomatic, then they should return to their main residence and continue to follow all the national guidance around isolation and testing, etc. Just moving on to the next slide. So I've just gone to a little bit more detail here around some of the considerations to support isolation for your staff, if you've got residents, and a bit around grants as well around self-isolation. So I won't cover those now in the interest of time, but you can come to me with questions. I'm very happy to do another webinar at another time if that would be useful. Next slide, please. So the key message really is be prepared now. Don't wait until you've got an outbreak on your hands. So the first message really is train your staff. Make sure that everybody knows how to contact Public Health England and the local public health team and environmental health teams. Sorry about my tongue again. Make sure you've got a sickness policy and a clear mechanism for sickness reporting. So make sure staff have got an awareness of the COVID symptoms as well, so they're really quick to recognise those and isolate. You might want to think about having a cleaning squad ready to go. Make sure you've got all your adequate cleaning supplies in stock, so you don't have to be scrabbling around for those at the time of an outbreak. And think about who your contract cleaners might be for any short notice cleaning because you've got staff off because they're isolating, for example. Laundry facilities, make sure that you can wash things at high temperatures. Think about alginate bags. Make sure everybody's aware of the guidance around self-isolation and testing. I've seen so many circumstances where premises have sent home all of their staff off the back of a positive case, which might not have been necessary. And I've also heard reports of people getting tested without symptoms, for example, and thinking that a negative test means they can go back to work, which isn't the case if they're a contact of a positive case. Think about what support you've got in place for people affected. So I touched on that in my previous slide. How are you going to support isolation in your staff and your residents and your guests? Think about how you're going to manage staff, customers and visitors who have symptoms or become ill on site. What's the process? Is everybody aware of that process? And as I mentioned, you can include that information in the booking and check-in for your visitors. Think about going forward how you can support test and trace. I mean, there have been issues with test and trace, it has to be said, and I think we've all experienced the fact that we're not potentially getting information in a particularly timely way in order to inform really swift public health action. So just think about how you're logging staff members who are in that day, what their contact details are, what their movements are, and also about anyone you've got coming in, such as your maintenance workers. Make sure you've got a log of the days that they've been in and where they've been in terms of your setting as well. Obviously, we've got the NHS QR posters, and there are regulations about who needs to display those, and they can be used to help manage a situation. Have a plan in place if you need to close quickly, so you know what you're doing around electrical supplies, etc. And obviously, communications is absolutely key. Just from experience, we don't tend to get told in terms of the QR codes, we don't tend to identify that we've got a significant outbreak linked to a setting like a pub or some other type of premise. It tends to be that people are passing through places, and then it's very hard to then identify where they've picked up COVID and what the actions are. So that's why it's so important that in many locations you've got your COVID secure measures in place, because that will reduce spread, and it will also reduce the number of people that need to go into self-isolation. I think that's probably everything. What I've done on the last slide is just outline some of the real key guidance documents for you. So the working safely guidance, which is relevant to the tourism industry, the national action cards, and then the other bits around testing and isolation. I've also included some links to local resources. So you've got the BBFA guidance, good to go. You've got the links there to our resources around translated materials, if that's useful. And there's a link at the bottom there that came from the Torbay Public Health team around their advice and support for businesses. So I think that's everything from me. Thank you.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much. There's some great information there. A lot for us to take in, but you've got all the slides and they'll be available for everybody to look through. It is an absolute minefield having to deal with all this, and you've gone through it very well. And thank you, James, also for dealing with the slides. So we'll deal with questions and answers to you with everybody after Liz. I'm going to bring in Liz now, who's going to talk about the PR and media in the event of an outbreak. So Liz, if you can handle this well, then I shall send you up to government to see if we can handle our PR a little better than we are at the moment. But I didn't say that, did I? So over to you, Liz. All right.
Thank you very much, Neil. And that's quite an ask, I have to say. But right, thank you, everybody. This is going to be a very, very rapid canter through, and I'm very mindful of the fact that we've got only a few minutes left for questions. So I would point out that the Business Communications Toolkit is available on the Better Business for All website. So we're going to just take the tops of points. Next slide, please. Okay, what I did want to go and say is that the communications is not a substitute by any means for being in contact with your local public health team. And as Sarah pointed out, there are various arrangements and they're often changing. So worth actually being in touch in advance. And a lot of what I'm going to say is actually about the stuff you can go and do in advance to be prepared. Next slide, please. Right, first principles, and this is about understanding why communications is so important. You might think, well, it's really obvious, but actually some people, when they're in a crisis, everything goes to pot. So it is about thinking about things in advance. It's one of the ways that you can get your business back and moving as quickly as possible and restore business as normal. It stops rumours, because there's nothing like rumours to do damage to a business. And it also helps reassure your customers, your community, and your suppliers. It's absolutely essential to go and ensure that you've got your communications on point. Next slide, please. So how do you start this? Well, by giving it some consideration in advance. One of the best things that you can do is agree who's going to be in charge of communications. Now, if you've got a family business or a small business, you might have various people trying to cut across or trying to be helpful, but actually you want to go and start delivering consistent messages. So decide who's in charge and stick to it. One of the things we always say is, for goodness sake, check what you're saying is correct, because things do move on. You might have some information, it might not be right, but it's okay not to know. But the point is that you need to be communicating regularly so that you don't let rumours or you don't let some worst case scenarios build up. And it's about talking to your staff in the first place to understand what's going on, but to also listen to their concerns and their fears. They can be your best weapon, actually, your staff. They're your advocates, your ambassadors. They're out in the community. And if they don't feel happy, then your customers won't. Right, next slide, please. So, first off, if you have an outbreak, one of the things that you may be required to go and do is to go and get your staff together, not physically necessarily, but do you have the means to go and do that virtually? That's something you can prepare about now. If you don't know what's going on, it's fine to say, but it's better to communicate that you don't know and you're beginning to trying to understand and investigate than it is not to say anything.
Liz, could you turn your camera off,
Leave
please?
people to go their own device. Yeah, of course. No problem. Is that better? Better? Good.
Thank you.
Sort of. Okay. It's what you're trying to do is to go and keep everybody in the internal communications loop so they understand, and then they're able to go and communicate to their networks as well. Think about what you would do if you have staff who are absent, who they might be sick, they just might be on leave, they might be on furlough, but they still need to be in the loop too. And don't let things fester. If you hear that things are going wrong, get out there and directly start countering some of these rumours. It's really important that that issues don't have an opportunity to grow. And it's amazing how the rumour mill does work, particularly with social media. Right, next slide, please. In terms okay. Right, in terms of external communications, and there's a huge amount more details in the toolkit. Here's your opportunity to start growing your social media now if you haven't got something. It's about getting your regular communications sorted now. If you don't communicate regularly with your customers, well, I'm hoping you do, perhaps now is the time that you can start doing it rather than in a crisis. You certainly don't want to be starting a social media feed in a crisis. Keep your messages really simple. You don't have to be complicated, but you do need to explain what you're doing to go and keep your premises COVID secure. Also look at what other options you have at your disposal. People forget about things like notice boards, they forget about things, the external signs. There are lots of options, but start thinking about what you might use to communicate if you were under pressure. And whilst we've sort of talked about social media and it's absolutely essential, it can also be a bit of a demon as well. People get very, very concerned, and if anybody picked up about the lady in Plymouth who was talking about mask wearing, she had nearly 2,500 comments on her social media feed, which absolutely crippled her and her business when she was trying to go and defend her position. But more to the point, it can consume large amounts of bandwidth. So allocating someone to deal with your social media feed is quite a helpful way to do it. And you can turn off commenting, but make sure the correct facts are there. That needs to be in place. And it's worth actually having someone monitoring what's being said. Next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. Media-wise, first tip is you don't have to do it, but if you are in the spotlight, consider whether it's a good thing for you to go and do. And if you've never done an interview before, doing it under pressure is quite hard. So you may wish to go and get some help. The thing that you can do, of course, is prepare. You need to have your information all at your fingertips and be very clear about what you want to say. And you don't have to go and do a face-to-face or virtual interview. What you can do is release a press statement. And that's a very, very easy way to go and get your facts very sorted in advance. Do check and keep checking what is being said about the situation, and because you may be required to be countering it. And sometimes the media themselves get facts wrong. And if they do, challenge them. It's really important. This is your business. This is your livelihood we're talking about. And if they've got it wrong, it's important that they restore it correct. Right, now, the next slide, please. Okay, recovery. I have never done anything this fast, but this doesn't happen overnight, but you can start thinking about the steps that you would need to take, okay? Your staff are going to be your best ambassadors. If they're happy, the likelihood is your customers are going to be happy. They're the ones that are going to go and be leading by example, if you like. So if they aren't actually following the advice that you've given them about social distancing, wearing a mask, etc., they're creating an atmosphere where guests or customers may feel that they don't have to abide by it. Absolutely reinforce on a regular basis why you need to be following the COVID secure behaviours. Consider about promotions. It's an opportunity for you to go and set the record straight. In other health and safety instances, we've seen big food poisoning outbreaks. There's an opportunity to go for businesses to go and learn about what's gone wrong, be absolutely transparent about it and say what they're doing differently. And it is an opportunity to start again. And have a look at what others are doing. Alistair talked briefly about price points, but actually, you know, if there are some good ideas, there's some good practice, don't be afraid to use it. We want to go and have as many COVID secure businesses as we possibly can in the Southwest. That's the best way that we can defend ourselves against this virus. Right, next slide, please. Right, a final, just a quick checklist. Be accountable. That's the important thing. COVID is going to be here for a while. It's no good blaming people or demonising people or giving out personal information, some of the things that we saw in the early stages. Do the best you possibly can. Use posters, all of these things, displaying these things will give customers confidence, but they'll also give your suppliers and your community confidence. Don't let lack of information cause you an issue. Get out there and be proactive. Last slide, please. That's it. So all I can say is have a look at the toolkit and think about your communications before you need to go and do it in a crisis. Thanks very much.
Liz, thank you very much for that. I was very pleased to see those Labrador dogs. They look that Labrador dog looked very similar to the one that we've got, and about as lively. Now, what I would say, Liz, I really agreed with what you said, and I think what I would say to everybody, if in a crisis, if you can put out a written statement, in my view, it's by far the best, because if you go out and sort of do an interview, you may say a little more than you thought you were going to, and people will then twist your words. The beauty of putting out a written statement is you can go through it time and time again and try and make sure it's right when it's done. And of course, social media is a minefield today, isn't it? And that's the issue that I imagine is probably one of the hardest to deal with. Well, thank you, Liz, for that. So we are into question and answer time now. So Jason, have you got a number of questions or what?
Phil, I think you've been searching for the questions to answer. I know Sean Hopkins has asked a number of questions, so I'll hand over to Phil and Dave to supervise questions.
Yeah, please, if you would, please. And then we'll try and make sure that people then answer the questions for them, if you see what I mean. All right.
Yeah, no problem. So many thanks to everybody for going through the questions. I think as we went through, there was a number and some have been answered, but we'll refer back. So if we go back to the original presentation that myself and David did, I think we got asked a couple of questions about Kickstart, and particularly about the role that DWP was playing. So I can answer that one. So I think Sean and Emily, you're absolutely right. It does seem a little bit tricky to route them through Job Centre Plus, but it is the way they've decided to do it, and we are feeding back to government that needs to be as easy as possible, but for various administrative reasons they want JCP and DWP to run the process. So working around that. I think you're absolutely right though, communications to young people about how this works and making it as seamless as possible, preferably without having to go into extensively a job centre, is the best way forward. And we're doing some work as the LEPs collectively, working across the area and as local authorities around that. So hopefully we'll have an answer for that shortly. When we start in November, we want to make it as easy as possible for a young person to walk in and go, I want to take a Kickstart placement. So it's a really good question. I think going through, there was a couple of reflections about the grants and where we are. Obviously, it's been very high demand. David, do we want to just say where we are in terms of the wider lobbying piece and the discussions with government? Because we haven't stopped there, have we?
Yeah, please do.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just trying to come off on mute. Yeah, so we there was a very live conversation going on through our MPs, quite regular meetings to highlight support generally, but particularly support around the sector. And I have to say, I think Devon MPs have done a terrific job in trying to represent the sector and highlight to government some of the real concerns, not just across Hart South West, but also Cornwall and Devon. There is actually another session with them, I think it's next week, where we'll be catching up on some of that. As I said earlier, so we've got two things really that we're pushing for. One is to try and increase the level of Kickstart grants. We think that was a reasonably efficient mechanism to get some small grants out to business. And as I said, the amount we got just wasn't sufficient really. And then the second main one is to try and we have gained support from our MPs, but to gain support from the Exchequer to retain the surplus emergency grants that went out so they can be distributed to businesses locally, perhaps with a bit more discretionary ability about how we might get that. So they're the major areas of where we're trying to chase more grant. I think my honest view is I think we will probably have to see how the next couple of weeks goes in terms of further local outbreaks, etc. But I think it is important that we are definitely supporting the need to assist the sector in securing some additional ability to secure grants and loans going forward.